It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other by name, where kids played outside until the streetlights flickered on, and the sound of lawnmowers in the summer was as familiar as the birds singing in the trees. Our house, tucked away at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, was our sanctuary. It wasn't the biggest, but it was ours, a cozy haven where we felt safe, where we could exhale and just be. Lily, my daughter, was the light of my life. Born with cerebral palsy, she couldn't walk or talk the way other children did, but her laughter filled our home like music. The sound of her joy was infectious, her spirit unbreakable. I'd spend hours with her, helping her with exercises, watching her face light up as she reached small milestones. She had a willpower that defied her condition. Every step she took, even if it was slow and painful, felt like a triumph. Our mornings were simple but meaningful. I'd help Lily get dressed, assist her to her chair, and we'd have breakfast together while the sun began to rise. We'd take walks down the street, her eyes wide with wonder at the world around her. I could sense how much she loved being out in the fresh air, the wind in her face, feeling like a part of the world. For the most part, the neighborhood was just like any other. Families worked hard, kids went to school, and everyone kept to themselves. But there were whispers, subtle, unnoticed by most. The kind of whispers you might dismiss if you weren't paying attention. I first noticed Karen a few months after we moved in. She lived 2 doors down, a woman in her mid-40s, always impeccably dressed, with perfectly done hair that never seemed out of place, even on the hottest days. At first, I thought she was just a neighbor trying to be friendly, someone who was eager to introduce herself. But there was something about Karen that felt off. Her smile was always a little too wide, a little too forced. When she spoke to me, she often lingered a little longer than necessary, her gaze sharp as though she were analyzing every word, every movement I made. I'd brush it off, telling myself it was just the nerves of a new neighbor trying to make a connection. At first, Karen was the picture of sweetness. She'd wave from her porch, always asking how Lily was doing, expressing concern over her disability with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "She's such a fighter, isn't she?" she'd say, but there was always something about her tone that felt distant, almost clinical. It was only after a few weeks that I began to notice the unsettling way she watched us, too closely, too consistently. It wasn't just a passing glance, it was the kind of gaze that lingered, studied. When Lily struggled with her walker or had a difficult moment, Karen was always there, her eyes sharp and calculating. I couldn't explain it, but there was something about the way she looked at my daughter that made my skin crawl. Still, we continued our days, oblivious to the storm that was brewing just under the surface. The calm before the storm, as they say. It wasn't until later that I realized how wrong I was to ignore the signs. It wasn't long before the uneasy feeling I had about Karen became harder to ignore. What started as casual small talk, exchanges about the weather, the neighborhood gossip, soon took on a more invasive tone. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe she was just curious, maybe she was just a neighbor trying to connect. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that her questions weren't normal. They weren't the friendly inquiries you'd expect from someone genuinely interested in getting to know us. It started with small, seemingly harmless remarks. I remember one afternoon, when Lily and I were sitting on the porch enjoying the sun, Karen walked by with her dog. She stopped, gave us a polite smile, and then, as if by accident, she said, "It must be so exhausting, taking care of her all the time." I nodded, trying to keep the conversation light. "It's challenging sometimes, but she's my daughter. I wouldn't have it any other way." Karen didn't respond with a smile or even a nod of understanding. Instead, she simply tilted her head, her eyes narrowing as she studied Lily. "I don't know how you do it. She'll never be able to take care of herself, will she? I mean, she'll never really be independent." The words hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just the bluntness of it, it was the certainty in her tone. She wasn't just making an observation, it felt like she was passing judgment on my daughter's future. I could feel the temperature drop, the awkwardness hanging in the air like a thick fog. I forced a smile, trying to dismiss the discomfort that crept into my chest. "Lily's doing great," I said, my voice a little firmer than I intended. "She's stronger than most people give her credit for." But Karen didn't seem satisfied with that response. She leaned in just a little, as though she were trying to gauge something deeper. "Does she really need all that help, though? I mean, do you ever think she might be better off if you didn't help so much? Maybe it's too much for her." I felt my stomach turn. Her words were like an icy gust of wind that cut right through me. There was no doubt in my mind now, Karen wasn't just making casual observations. She was pushing, testing boundaries, and something about it made me feel like I was being manipulated. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and quickly excused myself, retreating into the house with Lily. The last thing I needed was to get into a confrontation with Karen, especially when she was so carefully hiding her hostility behind the mask of concern. As the days went on, Karen's behavior only grew more unsettling. She would appear unexpectedly at the worst times, just when Lily had a bad day or was struggling to walk a few steps. Karen would stand there, observing, as if she were taking notes on Lily's every movement. One afternoon, I was helping Lily down the stairs to our backyard, trying to get her into her wheelchair when Karen suddenly appeared, standing at the fence. She smiled that same cold smile, her eyes watching every little thing Lily did. "You know," she said, her voice so calm it was almost chilling, "I read that some disabilities are more manageable if you just let the child push through them on their own. Maybe you should try that with her. Let her do more things by herself." I could feel the blood rush to my face, anger bubbling up inside me. It wasn't just the insult to my parenting, it was the judgment she was casting on my daughter's entire existence. But again, I held my tongue. "She's doing as much as she can," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "She has her own pace, and I respect that." Karen didn't argue. She simply nodded, her eyes narrowing with a look that told me she wasn't finished. "If you say so," she said, her tone now heavy with something I couldn't quite identify, something that made me want to run, to lock the doors and never look back. From then on, I became hyper-aware of Karen's presence. She seemed to pop up at the most inconvenient times, always when I was with Lily, always when things weren't going perfectly. If Lily stumbled, Karen would be right there, watching, her gaze calculating. If Lily asked for help, Karen would ask, with that same unsettling calm, "Does she really need that much help?" I began to feel trapped, like I was under a microscope. It was no longer just the odd comment here and there, Karen's presence was starting to feel suffocating. She was becoming a fixture in our lives, one that I didn't want, but couldn't seem to escape. I tried to talk to my husband about it, but he brushed it off. "She's just a neighbor trying to be friendly," he said. "Maybe she's just curious." But I knew better. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't just curious. She was calculating. She was testing us, testing me, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep my guard up before she pushed too far. It had been weeks since Karen's comments started to make me uneasy, but I tried my best to dismiss them as nothing more than a difficult neighbor. I told myself I was overreacting, that she was just one of those people who liked to voice her opinions a little too loudly. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. There was something more to Karen's behavior, something darker that I couldn't ignore anymore. It all came to a head one afternoon when Lily had a particularly rough day. Her muscles were stiff, and she had a hard time even lifting her arms, let alone walking. I had to help her into her wheelchair, something that usually went smoothly, but that day was different. As I gently assisted her, I noticed Karen standing at the end of our driveway, watching us. I didn't think much of it at first. But when Lily struggled to adjust her seat, I heard Karen's voice, louder than usual, as if she wanted us to hear. "She's not going to get anywhere with you doing everything for her," Karen said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You're just holding her back, you know. You should let her do more things by herself." That's the only way she's going to grow. I turned to face her, my frustration bubbling up. I'm doing what's best for my daughter, Karen, I said, my voice firm. She has her own pace, and I'm here to support her every step of the way. Karen didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, her gaze unwavering, and that cold, calculating smile spread across her face. It's not about supporting her, it's about making her think she needs help when she doesn't. She'll never be independent if you keep coddling her like this. I felt my blood boil. I had tried to be polite. I had tried to brush it off, but she had crossed a line now. Lily wasn't some project to be fixed. She wasn't something to be coddled. She was my daughter, and I loved her. I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Karen, talk down to me about how to care for her. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Karen, I said, you need to stop with this. You don't understand what it's like. You don't know my daughter, and you don't know what she needs. So, for your own sake, stay out of it. Karen's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I saw something shift in her, a flicker of anger, maybe even resentment. It was a look that told me this wasn't just a disagreement anymore. This was a challenge. She tilted her head, her lips curling into that same, unsettling smile. Fine, she said, stepping back. But don't say I didn't warn you. I watched her walk back to her house, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Something told me this wouldn't end with a simple conversation. Karen wasn't just trying to correct my parenting. She was trying to control it. And I wasn't going to let her. That evening, when Lily was asleep, I told my husband about the incident. He listened, but his response was exactly what I expected. Maybe she's just trying to help, honey. I think you're reading too much into it. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Karen wasn't offering help. She wasn't trying to be kind or supportive. She was playing a game, and she had just made the first move. The next few days were filled with an unease I couldn't shake. I started noticing little things around the house, things that seemed out of place. A door left slightly ajar when it should have been shut. My gardening tools were moved, scattered around the yard in strange spots. I even found a broken flower pot near the driveway, as though someone had intentionally dropped it. At first, I thought it was just me being paranoid. But then it happened again, more incidents, each one just a little more unsettling than the last. I'd catch Karen watching us from her window, her face barely visible behind the curtains. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. One afternoon, I went outside to grab the mail, and as I passed her house, I saw her standing by her fence, looking directly at me. When our eyes met, she didn't smile. There was no warmth, no friendliness in her gaze. Instead, her eyes were cold, almost calculating, as if she were studying me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I felt a chill run down my spine, and the sense of dread I'd been trying to ignore finally hit me full force. Karen wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was a threat. She was pushing boundaries, testing limits, and I had no idea just how far she was willing to go. That night, as I lay in bed next to my husband, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were no longer safe. The comfort and peace of our home had been shattered, replaced with a sense of unease that gnawed at me. And Karen, I realized, was just getting started. It was a day like any other, or at least, it should have been. Lily and I had spent the morning outside in the garden, enjoying the warmth of the sun on our faces. I was so focused on helping her with her exercise routine that I didn't notice the figure watching us from the corner of my eye. Karen. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, just another one of those subtle moments when you feel someone's presence but can't quite place it. But then, I saw her again, standing at the edge of our yard, her eyes locked on us. This time, though, there was no smile. No, how are you doing today? Just a cold, calculating gaze that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Mom, can we go inside now? Lily asked, her voice breaking through my thoughts. I turned to see her face pale, her body swaying slightly. She had always been resilient, but I could see the strain today. The stiffness in her muscles seemed to be wearing her down, and she needed to rest. I nodded, pushing her wheelchair toward the house, keeping my eyes on Karen, who hadn't moved. I could feel her stare burning into my back as we retreated inside. As the door clicked shut behind us, I let out a sigh of relief. Just a little longer, sweetheart. We'll go inside soon, I murmured, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. She smiled weakly, clearly exhausted, and I started preparing lunch, trying to push the odd feeling in my chest away. But then, it happened. I heard it first, the unmistakable screech of a car tire on gravel. A sharp, hurried sound that snapped me to attention. My heart pounded as I rushed to the window. Karen's car was speeding down the street, but it wasn't just that. Something was wrong. I saw her pull up to the driveway and immediately get out. Her movements were frantic, almost too fast. And that's when I knew. Lily. I ran to the back door, throwing it open with panic flooding my veins. But by the time I reached the yard, it was too late. Lily was gone. My legs buckled beneath me as I scanned the area, my breath coming in desperate gasps. And then I saw it. The fence at the back of our yard, the one we always thought was a barrier, had been tampered with. The padlock, the very lock I'd checked 100 times, was undone. The chain that should have kept us safe had been cut. And there, in the cold, shadowy corner of the yard, was Karen, standing there, watching. Lily. My daughter. Chained to the fence. My heart stopped. I felt the blood drain from my face, my body frozen in place. There was no sound except the wind, the soft rustling of leaves, and Lily's shallow, panicked breathing. The sight of her, my precious girl, trapped like an animal was something I would never be able to unsee. Her hands were pressed against the cold metal of the fence, her face pale and streaked with tears. Blood trickled from a wound on her leg, and she looked up at me, her eyes wide with terror, her lips trembling. "Mom," she gasped, her voice weak, barely audible over the cold wind that had begun to bite at our skin. Every instinct in me screamed to run to her, to tear down the fence, to pick up my daughter and get her out of there. But I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed with shock and disbelief. And there was Karen, standing a few feet away, her arms crossed, her expression one of eerie calm. "She needs to learn," Karen said, her voice too cold, too detached. "You've been babying her for too long. Maybe this will teach her what real strength is." "Karen!" I screamed, my voice breaking. "What the hell are you doing? Let her go. Let my daughter go." But Karen just stood there, her eyes never leaving Lily, her gaze almost clinical. "She's too weak. She needs to understand that life isn't going to give her any favors. If she wants to be something, she has to fight for it. She has to earn it." My legs finally found movement, and I rushed toward Lily, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. But as I neared the fence, I realized the harsh truth. The lock wasn't the only thing holding her there. Karen had gone further. Lily was chained tightly, too tightly. The metal dug into her delicate skin, and she was too weak to pull away. Her hands were covered in blood, her nails digging into the chains as she struggled to free herself. The cold had already started to set in, and Lily's breathing was growing more labored. "Lily!" I cried, reaching for her, but Karen moved forward, blocking my way. "No," she said, her voice still unnervingly calm. "Let her be. She'll be fine." I felt a surge of rage flood my body. "No. She's not fine. You've done enough. Let her go." I screamed at the top of my lungs. But it was as if Karen couldn't hear me. Or worse, as if she didn't care. I was shaking now, my voice unrecognizable with fear and fury. I reached for my phone, dialing emergency services, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hit the buttons. But with every second that passed, it was becoming more and more apparent that time was running out. Lily's body was slumped against the fence, her face now a sickly shade of blue as she struggled to breathe. The blood was pooling around her, and it wasn't stopping. "Help her!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. Karen simply turned and walked away, as if my daughter's life meant nothing to her. Her footsteps echoed in the yard as she disappeared into the cold, leaving me with the one thing I feared more than anything else, the possibility of losing my child. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees, carrying with it the bitter chill of the evening. I could feel the cold seep into my bones, but it wasn't the temperature that made me shiver, it was the sight of Lily, chained to that fence, struggling for breath. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by an iron grip as I ran toward her, my steps faltering in the frozen mud beneath me. Every breath I took felt like a struggle, every second felt like it might be my last chance to save her. Her hands were bloodied, the chains cutting into her skin with each movement, her face pale and etched with pain. Her eyes, wide with terror, locked onto mine as she gasped for air. "Mom, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her breath was shallow, ragged, and each time she tried to inhale, it seemed like her lungs couldn't catch up. The fight to breathe, the fight to survive, it was happening right in front of me, and I couldn't reach her fast enough. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the chain, trying to unlock it. The cold metal felt like it was mocking me, holding my daughter hostage in a way I couldn't understand. I could feel the minutes ticking away. Every second that passed made her struggle more intense, her breaths more strained. My body was shaking from the raw panic clawing at my chest, but there was no time for fear now. Only action. "Lily, sweetheart, hold on," I cried, my voice breaking as I pulled at the chains with everything I had. But the lock was stubborn, the cold making my fingers numb. I couldn't get a good grip, and the seconds felt like hours. My mind raced, how could Karen do this? How could she leave my baby out here like this? I looked at Lily, her face turning a darker shade with every passing breath. Blood had pooled around her leg, the wound Karen had inflicted, and it was starting to spread. Her body shuddered, each breath a battle she was losing. I needed to act, I needed to get her out of here. "Mom," Lily's voice was weak now, barely more than a whisper, and it tore at me. "I can't breathe," I choked back a sob, pushing through the panic. "Don't you dare give up on me now, Lily. I'm right here. Just hold on." I tried again, pulling at the chain, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was rusted, the metal too stiff from the cold, and I was running out of time. I could see her chest rising and falling in desperate, shallow breaths. The blood from her leg was staining the dirt, darkening the space around her. I didn't know how much longer she could last. The wind howled louder, whipping against my skin, but all I could hear was Lily's struggle for life. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, the fear eating at me from the inside. "Please, please, baby," I begged. "Don't do this. Please don't leave me." I finally stopped trying to undo the chain and instead ripped it apart, my fingers raw from the cold metal. The frustration, the helplessness, the desperation boiled up inside me. My world had narrowed to this one moment, saving my daughter. Everything else disappeared. There was no more room for fear or doubt. Only Lily. With a final tear, the chain fell to the ground, and I grabbed Lily's arm, pulling her toward me. Her body was cold, too cold, and I could feel the weight of her slumped against me. I held her close, my heart racing as I tried to assess the damage. The blood was still flowing from her leg, and the cold had begun to take its toll. I could feel her shivering, trembling against me, her skin pale and clammy. "Lily, please, please stay with me," I whispered desperately, my hands shaking as I wrapped my arms around her. I could feel her breathing, weak, shallow, but steady for now. It wasn't enough. Not yet. I started to drag her away from the fence, my legs threatening to give out beneath me as I stumbled through the snow, clutching her to my chest. My mind raced, 1,000 thoughts crashing together. Where was the help? Why hadn't I reached her sooner? The world seemed to close in on me as I struggled to move, to save her. Every step felt like I was walking through quicksand, every second stretching longer than the last. I could feel Lily's pulse under my fingertips, weak, but still there. And with every beat, I held on tighter. I tried not to think about how close we were to losing her. I tried not to think about how cold her body felt, how pale her skin had become. My only focus was getting her inside, getting her warm, getting her help. I didn't know how much longer she could hang on. As I finally made it to the back door, I could barely push it open, my hands too numb to grip the handle properly. I finally got the door open, but as I stepped inside, I felt my knees buckle beneath me. I was about to fall, but I held on to Lily with everything I had. "Please, Lily," I begged as I carefully laid her down. "Stay with me. Please, just stay with me." I grabbed a blanket, wrapping her up as tightly as I could, trying to warm her with my own body heat. But she was too cold. The blood was still leaking from her leg, and the room seemed to close in on us, the air thick with the weight of my panic. "Mom. I'm scared," Lily whispered, her voice so faint that I almost didn't hear it. I fought back the tears, shaking my head. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. And you're going to be okay." But even as I said it, a part of me wondered if I was lying. The blood, the cold, the way her breathing was still too shallow, it didn't feel like enough time had passed to save her. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, my hands shaking as I pleaded with the operator to hurry. I couldn't lose her. Not like this. Not to Karen. Not to anyone. And in the silence that followed, as I held my daughter in my arms, I knew that the fight was far from over. Karen had crossed the line, she had taken everything from us. But I would do whatever it took to make sure Lily didn't lose hers. The ringing of the phone was the only sound breaking the silence. My fingers were trembling so badly that I almost missed the call, but I managed to press the screen, my breath caught in my throat. The dispatcher's voice, though calm and reassuring, felt distant, like it was coming from miles away rather than right in front of me. "We're sending help right now," she said. "Stay with your daughter. Stay calm." I could barely hear her. My focus was on Lily. She was still in my arms, her body so cold that it felt like she was slipping away with every passing second. I could feel her pulse under my fingers, weak, irregular, but there. Still there. She was still alive, but not for long if I didn't get her help fast. I dropped the phone onto the kitchen counter and turned back to my daughter. Her eyes were closed now, her lips a pale blue, and I could feel her breath growing more shallow, more labored. Her hand barely twitched as I held it, but I could see the fear in her face, even in her unconscious state. It was as if her body was giving up, but I wasn't ready to let go. I needed to keep her awake. I needed to keep her fighting. "Lily, sweetheart, I'm here," I whispered, brushing her hair back, my voice trembling. "You need to stay with me, baby. Just a little longer. You can do this." But no matter how much I begged, how much I urged, her body was failing her. The blood from her leg wound had soaked through the blanket I wrapped around her, and the cold was making it worse. My mind raced. What could I do? What was I missing? My own panic was threatening to choke me. The silence was suffocating. And then, I heard it. The distant sound of sirens. I closed my eyes, relief flooding through me. They were close. They were really close. I sat on the floor beside Lily, pulling her into my arms, doing everything I could to keep her as warm as possible. "Hold on, baby. Help is coming. Help is coming. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching. They were here. The paramedics burst through the back door, 2 men and a woman, their uniforms a blur of motion as they rushed to Lily. "We've got her," one of the men said, his voice calm but urgent. He immediately started to assess her condition, checking her pulse, her breathing, his hands working efficiently, but there was no mistaking the concern on his face. "She's in shock," the woman said, her voice steady, but her eyes were filled with worry. "We need to stop the bleeding and get her warm." They moved with practiced urgency, their hands swift but careful, as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. I stepped back, giving them space, my eyes never leaving Lily. I couldn't look away, couldn't allow myself to believe that she was truly going to be okay until I saw it with my own eyes. The woman looked up at me, her face grim but reassuring. "She's stable, for now. We need to get her to the hospital immediately. She's lost a lot of blood, but she's hanging on." "That's a good sign." My heart was still hammering in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't let myself believe it yet. But the tightness in my chest loosened just a fraction. Lily was still alive. She had made it through the worst of it. I stood back as the paramedics lifted Lily onto the stretcher, gently strapping her in. She was pale, so pale it scared me to look at her, but there was a subtle rise and fall of her chest, a steady rhythm that hadn't been there just moments ago. They moved quickly, ready to get her into the ambulance, and I followed closely behind, my heart still racing, my mind reeling with disbelief. The woman looked over at me as I climbed into the ambulance, sitting by Lily's side. "You did good, Mom. You got her through this." I nodded, my throat tight. I don't know how. I couldn't get her out fast enough." "You did. She's still with you." I held Lily's hand tightly as the doors of the ambulance closed, the world outside suddenly a blur as we raced through the streets. The flashing lights outside cut through the night like a beacon, but all I could focus on was the warmth of Lily's hand in mine and the faint, steady rhythm of her breathing. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know how much damage Karen had done, or how long it would take for Lily to heal from this. But right now, in this moment, all I cared about was that my daughter was still alive. She had survived. I couldn't let her go, not like that. And as the ambulance sped toward the hospital, I whispered, barely audible, "You're going to be okay, Lily. I'm not letting go." The hospital room was quiet, save for the soft beep of the heart monitor and the muffled sound of footsteps in the hallway. Lily lay in the bed, her small body wrapped in blankets, her leg bandaged, the wound still fresh, though the bleeding had stopped. The doctors had stabilized her, but the emotional toll was far from over. The doctors told me she would heal physically, but the trauma of what she'd endured, that would take much longer to mend. I sat in the chair beside her, my hand resting gently on hers. Her breathing was slow and steady, but there was a dullness to her eyes that hadn't been there before. My heart broke every time I looked at her, every time I thought about what she'd gone through. My strong, brave little girl, forced to face something so cruel, so unimaginable. And I hadn't been there fast enough to stop it. The guilt gnawed at me like a constant ache. I should have seen it coming. I should have been more vigilant, more protective. But how do you prepare for something like this? How do you anticipate the actions of a person like Karen? I ran through the events of that afternoon over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of everything. The moment I saw her chained to that fence, the panic that had seized me, the feeling of helplessness as I tried and failed to free her. I had failed her. I had failed to keep her safe. And then there was the anger. The overwhelming fury that I felt whenever I thought about Karen. How could she? How could anyone do this to a child? To my child? I knew what I'd seen, the coldness in her eyes, the way she'd stood there, watching my daughter struggle. But the more I thought about it, the harder it became to understand. It didn't make sense. And yet, it didn't matter. She had done it. She had hurt my daughter. The police had arrived soon after the paramedics, but Karen had already fled the scene by then. She hadn't been there when the authorities arrived, and I couldn't help but feel a small sense of relief. She couldn't hurt Lily anymore, at least, not physically. But the police had assured me that they were doing everything they could to track her down. They'd taken her statements, collected evidence, and were in the process of gathering her background. They'd find her. They had to. But even with Karen being held accountable, something inside me felt unsettled. The damage was done. Lily's life would never be the same. No matter how many times the authorities told me they'd find justice, no matter how many legal procedures were followed, there was no undoing the trauma Karen had caused. The scars were already there, on my daughter's body, and in her heart. I looked down at Lily's hand in mine, the small, delicate fingers that once gripped mine so tightly, now pale and lifeless. She was asleep, her face relaxed, though I knew she wasn't at peace. I could see the faintest tremor in her hands, the way her eyes would flutter open in the night, only to quickly shut again, as though she was still searching for a way to escape. I couldn't imagine the nightmares she was having. What she had been through was unimaginable, but what hurt most was that she'd had to endure it alone. She had been locked away, chained, left to fight for her life while Karen watched her suffer. I hated that my daughter had to face that kind of fear. But in the midst of it all, there was still hope. There had to be. Lily was still alive. She was still here with me, and I wouldn't let her go through this alone. We would get through it, together. The doctors said the physical healing would take time, but emotionally, we'd have to work together. I wouldn't let the trauma break her. I wouldn't let it break us. Mom? Lily's voice broke through my thoughts, weak and raspy. I looked down at her, startled, but her eyes were open, though they were unfocused. Is it over? My heart swelled with a mix of relief and sorrow. I squeezed her hand tightly, trying to hold back my tears. It's over, baby, I whispered. You're safe now. You're safe. But even as I said the words, I knew that things would never truly be the same. The damage had been done, and the scars would remain forever. And I knew, deep down, that no matter how much healing we went through, we would always carry this with us. But the one thing I would never carry was the guilt. I had to stop blaming myself. I had done everything I could to protect her, but there were forces outside my control, forces that were beyond my reach. And for once, I needed to let go of the guilt. I needed to focus on Lily, on her healing, and on the love that still ran between us, even in the wake of such a horrible act. The authorities would find Karen. She would be held accountable, and justice would be served. But no matter what happened with Karen, the real healing began here, in this room, with Lily. We were stronger than she could ever know. And as Lily's eyes fluttered shut again, her breathing steady, I vowed to protect her with everything I had left. No one would ever do this to her again.